Aaron here from MyLab. Today we're going to be talking about rowing. Rowing is a super important exercise because we are hunched over like I am all day long, and it works all the muscles of your back, your posterior chain, to help pull you up into a better posture. We're going to be going over multiple variations of rows today that are all going to hit the back in a slightly different way, and you can find which ones you like the best. So we're going to start off with a seated cable row, or just a seated row in general. You can do this with a TheraBand, or you can do this with a super band as well if you don't have access to a cable machine. Now, when doing a seated row, I like to use two individual handles. The reason for this is you can pull it back and get a more full range of motion by driving your elbows behind you and focusing on scapular retraction. If I'm to do this with a D-bar, which are usually more narrow, it stops when it hits my my sternum and my rib cage, so you can't get quite as full of a range of motion. It's fine if you don't have access to individual handles. Before I get into the real demo of the seated row exercise, really with every row, what we're trying to focus on is if these are your shoulder blades, they are depressing and they are retracting. You don't want to be shrugging up, and you don't want to just have them staying like protracted where they're out and you're just moving your biceps around. With the seated row, back to it. We're gonna start upright with your shoulders set in a good position. If you don't know what set in a good position is, you can shrug them up, back, and down, or more simply, roll them back, and that's gonna make sure that you're pulling to a good position. From here, we're gonna drive the elbows behind you, finishing with your hands at the bottom of your rib cage, about in line with where your belly button is. Another great row variation, and one of my top two least favorite exercises to coach, is the one-arm dumbbell row. And the reason why I don't like coaching it is because so many people do it wrong. So we're gonna make sure today that you're not doing it wrong. So to set up, you want one leg on the bench, one leg on the ground. Very important thing here. The leg on the ground is going to be in front of the leg that's on the bench. This is to help keep your hips level. The big common mistake I see is people will be set up like this, where they're open, rotated, and they're just kind of moving their bicep around. You might be able to use more load here, but it's not going to be hitting your back as well. We want to be set up here, where the back leg is mainly just there for balance. All right, so we have this front leg in the front, and we're putting a lot of weight into this. It's a little bit further away from the bench. We're not directly hugging it. And the other arm is near the top of the bench, and make sure that you're not letting your scapula wing by not having this arm protracted. It should be stable. Also, throughout the entire movement, we want to keep the hips level. I don't want you to, like, you're turning on your lawnmower or something. This weight's going to hang, so we get a good stretch in the working arm, and then we're rowing up to the exact same place that you were when you were doing the seated row. So a cue that I love when doing this is that I'm putting my shoulder blade into my back pocket. Really big common mistake you see here is people being a hero with their biceps and just rowing up to their chest right here. This causes more shrugging, and it causes the shoulder to not retract. It protracts around in internal rotation. So don't do that. Now, if you feel really good about the one-armed row, you can move into a quadruped row, which is very similar, but it's going to involve a lot more ab, and you're going to have to be a lot more conscious about not letting your hips rotate. So, one hand on the bench. We're going to kick one leg out, and that's going to be the opposite of the working arm. Dumbbell's going to be out, and we're doing the exact same rowing technique. What makes this exercise so difficult is you want to go down like that. So we got to make sure that we have a really great core brace as we're rowing back. It's about 50% ab and it's about 50% back that's being worked when you're doing the quadruped row there. The last row variation I'm going to show you is a chest supported row. Our bench here is pretty tall, so I might be a little bit more upright. Most adjustable benches you see will finish where the headrest is here. So let's keep that in mind as I'm doing this. This is a good variation if you've seen a bent over row before. People make tons of errors where they don't know how far to bend down, they thrust their hips as they're coming up, they're shrugging. The chest supported row is going to make sure you're not doing any of that and still focusing on getting a really good scapular retraction. So I'm going to grab hold of both dumbbells. You're going to rest your chest on the top of the bench. You can either have both your feet squared up, or you can take a split stance, whatever you're most comfortable with. From here, we are simply driving the elbows to the ceiling, thinking about squeezing the shoulder blades together, once again, trying to drive them down into your back pocket. A common thing people will say here is they don't feel like they're pulling it up high enough. but they are. And a big mistake, probably the biggest one I see, is people will curl their wrist to try and bring it up higher to the ceiling, but all that's doing is loading the wrist and not the back, so don't do any of that. We're gonna get Dan in here next to show some more regressions, some variations of these you can do at home if you don't have access to a weight room. And another thing I wanted to address was elbow angle. So Dan, I want you to go seated row like we were doing before. Good, and pull back. So when the elbows are tucked in, we're gonna get more lat. Whenever you're doing any sort of rowing exercise, you are using your entire back, but we're just talking about where it's being biased to. And generally, as the elbows are tucked in, it's gonna be more of a lat bias. And then as Dan raises them up, we're gonna get more into the traps, more into the posterior delts, and more into the rhomboids. Now, if you're struggling with feeling your back, we don't really recommend going up into any of these higher elbow variations. You should instead have your arms out straight and just focus on straight up retraction if you're trying to focus on hitting those rhomboids a bit more. So, first variation you can do at home, we're just gonna wrap around a TheraBand, around any sort of post you might have, a sturdy table. And Dan's gonna do the exact same thing I was doing with the cable. So let's make sure that we're set up, it's under tension. Let's start with that little slight shoulder roll. We're going up, back, and down. Good. And I want you to drive your elbows behind you, squeezing my fingers with your shoulder blades. You can pretend there's a little grape you're trying to crush in between them. Good, and you do want to make sure that we are getting some protraction of the shoulder blades as well as you're letting it out, so we get a good full range of motion, but don't let that be confused with rounding your thoracic spine or your upper back. We're just letting the shoulder blades glide back and forth. Excellent. All right, so some more variations you can do here. If you're trying to hit more low trap, simply row and pull it more towards your hips. So we'll get Dan to do a few of those. Good. Nice, yeah, and you can really feel those low traps firing as you palpate down here. Next, we're gonna be doing the straight arm shoulder retraction variation where we're focusing more on the rhomboids. You'll notice that the band has to be a bit higher up for this. All right, so just retract back, keeping your arms straight, only pulling from your shoulder blades. A big mistake that you want to avoid here is pulling with your biceps as you're doing this and cheating, turning it into a weird half-faced pull. Yeah, so none of that. Back to the good one. Excellent. Another thing you want to avoid on a seated row is letting the head carriage come too far forward, where you're straining the neck. You want to keep those ears in line with where the shoulders are. Keep it back. Good. Now your practitioner may recommend some specific rep sets that are most correct for you, though generally in the first phase of rehab, we want to be going until the muscle starts burning. That's going to indicate that the muscles are being worked and that they're being strengthened. In phase 2 of rehab, when you're like out of pain and you're trying to build more strength, we want to go until you get to technical failure where there's only 0, 1, 2 reps left in the tank, or till 25 reps, whatever comes first. If you have any questions, please leave us a comment below. Always happy to get back to you. Also, you can send us a message on Instagram or send us an email at info@milelab.ca.